I've kind of said to them, whoever wants to answer, you guys grab the mic. So we'll see how this goes. Yes.
Anyone can answer. You said only 1% of the victims that are trafficked get saved or get out. So what happens to the rest?
Okay, who wants to answer? Okay, not better. Sam.
So it's hard to say, but in most cases, what we've seen is that the survivors, the victims that become survivors, they have a specific personality type, and they're very alpha. They're strong, passionate, they're very intelligent, wise, manipulative, coercive. They know how to play the game, and that's why they're still alive. So a lot of times when the girls or the boys don't survive or they're still trapped, it's because they've either been beaten down into submission so much that they are completely just, there's no fight left in them anymore, and they're slaves, they're in bondage. We talked about in the awareness side that, you have the 3 parts of human trafficking: the trick, the trap, and the trade. And the trap is a very important part that we don't always take into account. We wonder, why don't they escape? Why don't they run away? There's a lot of factors that play a role, and emotional bondage is huge. So manipulation of, if you run, I'm gonna kill your family. So the girl doesn't run. Or if you run, she's gonna get punished every time you try and run. She's gonna get punished, not you. So it's like this like threats and this coercion that happens where the girls, they can't leave because of that reason. So they're trapped there. A lot of other times, they like Berta said, it's true, they don't survive. There are girls and boys that get killed all the time, which is horrible. So there's a lot of different factors that play a role, but that's one of the main reasons is you see the personalities come out, and if someone is a very quiet, timid, shy, person with no drive, and they usually end up getting killed and they don't survive, they don't make it.
And that's why we're doing what we're doing, because that 1% is going to become 50%, and then 70, and then 90. If the Church of Jesus Christ comes on board, because there's a church on every block in our nation. If the Church of Jesus Christ comes on board, we can kill human trafficking. But without the Church of Jesus Christ, it's going to be an upward struggle until Jesus comes back. Yeah.
Just something else that we can also remember is the fact that we don't just do awareness to people who need to know to not become trafficked, but people who are in trafficking situations don't necessarily know that they're being trafficked. We often connect with people, or we hear stories about people who realize that they're being trafficked because that's normal life for them. If you look at labor trafficking especially, it seems to a lot of people that this is it. This is normal. There's other people that this is happening to they don't know. So it's also for a lack of knowledge and not stepping up and saying, I'm going through this, or just feeling like there is no other option, this is it. So, and just remember what we spoke about statistics. We're dealing with what we know. Statistics are based on what is reported and known around the world. But even when we look at South African statistics, we're like, oh my gosh, there's so much happening that's not reflected there. But we hear it from word of mouth, but it's not on a report. It hasn't gone through any reporting system. And so there's a real struggle there for investigation and research to be done. Okay, anyone else? Okay, let me get there.
I think Corin is probably the person to answer this one, but anyone who has the answer. But this is specifically about the safe houses, and I would just find it helpful to know who are the kind of people who are allowed to go there. So if we see a victim or we see someone who we think potentially needs to go to a safe house, who is included in that. If someone is in school but chooses to drop out and they choose to leave home, is that someone who would be allowed to go to a safe house? If they are stuck in drugs and that kind of thing, or if you could just expand on that.
We have safe houses all over the peninsula, the most amazing places. There's escape house, which takes young people. Yeah, even, minors, because minors are always a problem with the Child Protection Act is huge. And so, yes, what I would suggest if you find yourself in a position where someone needs to be in a safe house, or you have find a victim somewhere or whatever, just phone Stop Office, head office, and they will be able to take the situation further and to get evaluation, because assessment has to be done. There are various processes according to the Act before someone can go into a safe house. And the assessment has to be done by a social worker. And all these things are in place right now. But and they try and make it as easy as possible for you to get someone into a safe and secure place. So if you are going to be that person, just ring Stop head office. They're connected to all the safe houses in the peninsula. And they will take the process further because you work with a team. Does it answer your question? Okay. There is help.
There is also the National Resource Line. So if you have any, if you ever suspect that somebody might be being trafficked, you can phone that helpline, not helpline, sorry, the National Resource Line, 0800 222 777. It's an easy number to remember, so just try and remember that number, and they will screen the call. They'll ask all the questions. They know the questions to ask. They know what to look for. So that's also a good option.
Okay, anyone else? Yes.
Yeah, anyone can answer this that can. So yesterday it was said that human trafficking isn't prostitution, and it's not sex trafficking only. Could you expand on the technicalities behind that? Where's the line between human trafficking and prostitution?
I've got a very open opinion about this. You know, if you go into the history of prostitution, of most prostitutes, you will find that they were trafficked at a young age. And I always say to someone, when is someone trafficked? When they were trafficked 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 3 weeks ago, or yesterday? So there's a very fine line between prostitution and trafficking. And that's why we work with exiting of prostitution, prostitutes or treasures, also because we regard them as victims in their childhood or somewhere along the line. Nobody chooses to be a prostitute. No little girl of 3 runs around with butterfly wings on and says, "Oh, I want to be a prostitute one day." I mean, it's just not heard of. So there's a very fine line. Someone would probably like to say something else concerning this, but that's our approach from Stop's side.
Okay. Yeah, I think one of the, it's tough. It's tough because what Corin said is exactly true, that when you think about the word choice, it's like there's a very fine line. Like, does someone really choose to become a prostitute? And something that we discuss a lot when we talk about human trafficking is the exploitation of vulnerability. So if someone's being exploited, if a vulnerability is being exploited, whether it's a vulnerability like poverty or emotional needs or things like that, that needs to be taken into account. But when it comes to the legal side of it, that's where it gets very, in a way, almost black and white. It gets much more clear, because even though someone may be a trafficking victim, and Nicole can maybe explain this a little better, I think, too, but with the law, some cases can get prosecuted better if it's not necessarily considered a trafficking case. So the best way to explain it is, when we look at it and we look at someone, we can say, yeah, she was trafficked. Based on what Corin was just saying and based on the situation, we can say, yes, this is a trafficking case. But legally, during prosecution, we may call it something else. Like, I'm trying to think of an example, but we wouldn't prosecute as something else, even though we know deep down that this girl was trafficked. Does that kind of make sense? So with prostitution, it gets kind of blurry, because you can see a girl on the street with no pimp who is out there raising money for her family, and you would say, okay, she wasn't trafficked, which she wasn't. She's technically trafficking herself. But then you'd see another girl who was, coerced into it based on a fake job, who the trafficker told her she was going to be a maid or a house cleaner. She gets to the country, and then he's forcing her to sell her body. So do you guys see the difference between a girl who's choosing, again, choice, to work to raise money on her own versus someone who was exploited, who is being forced to do it out of her will? So it's a little different. There's some overlaps. Nicole can probably break it down.
No pressure, right? It's like Nicole knows. I hope I know. I think if we look at it from a the broad definition. South Africa has amazing legislation, just by the way. Our Trafficking in Persons Act, it's actually the Prevention and Combating of Trafficking in Persons Act, is amazing. People from other parts of the world really looked at it as kind of like a really good example of something that's watertight. Things like ukutwala are covered in it, so forced child brides that are happening in the Eastern Cape, it's all covered. But if you look at the technicalities of it, if you're asking a question like that from knowing, is this person being exploited, then we look at acts, means, purpose, what Nadia spoke about this morning. What happened, how it happened, what it happened for. So it's kind of like prostitution brings in this gray area, because where's that fine line when she was being exploited or when she chose to do that? If she didn't choose to do it, how did she get in there? So it's a very difficult area. But for something to be classified as trafficking, it has to have acts, means, and purpose. Now, when we look at something being classified, it's from a point of wanting to prosecute. So thinking about trafficking in a broad sense, there's a difference between human trafficking and human smuggling. Human smuggling is if I go and I find someone who can get me across the border, I pay them to get me there, they get me in illegally, and when I'm where I want to be, I'm on my own, I do my own thing. Now, I was brought in illegally, it's a crime against the state because I crossed over illegally. With trafficking, I'm enticed, I'm told there's a job offer, I'm brought across, I'm taken to maybe another part of the country or across a border, and it doesn't end when I reach the destination. It's not like I'm on my own. Then I'm exploited for something. Does it make sense? That's a very broad thing, but it really comes into play understanding the dividing lines when we're thinking about prosecution. But if we're thinking about people in situations where they're being exploited, where they don't have freedom, it's very hard to draw a line between prostitution and human trafficking. So I'm sorry if we didn't completely answer your question, but it's a tough one. It's one we're still grappling with. I mean, 4 weeks ago, we got training. That same training that was community mapping was talking about the difference between smuggling and trafficking, and we were all like, what? Is this smuggling? I thought it was trafficking, and it's challenging, but that's why as much as we tell you guys, learn, investigate, we're doing the same. We're learning, trying to understand. Human trafficking is constantly evolving. What pimps use to keep their girls in place on the streets is evolving. It's not the same as it was a year ago or 10 years ago. It evolves and it changes. The point that they're being exploited, that's inherent to the act of prostitution. Because if someone has to pay them to sleep with them, do they really want to do it? So it's a difficult one. But there is a difference between, I think what we were trying to say this morning is that there's a general concept around the world of human trafficking equals sex trafficking, and that's it. And what we wanted to say was there's more kinds of trafficking. It's a kind, sex trafficking is sexual exploitation is a kind of trafficking, but there's more to it. I hope we answered your question. Okay, anyone else?
My question is more in terms of legislation where I know I've got a strong opinion about abortion and it's legal in this country, and where some people have told me legalizing abortion is a good thing. You can regulate it better and you can decrease like backstreet abortions and stuff like that, where there's a lot of danger for the women as well. And recently I've seen a short article about how a prostitute was mishandled and the hashtag was decriminalize sex work. So I would like to know your stance, and I've actually Googled like prostitution laws, and in some countries prostitution is legal and regulated, and then in other countries it's illegal to buy sex, but legal to sell sex, and there are different pros and cons that people mention that it's actually a good thing to legalize the one and make the other one illegal, just to bring human trafficking in a sense into the light. I would just like to hear your thoughts on that. Yeah, in short.
Okay, looks like it's me by default. We had the opportunity this year to actually be involved on a real level with this conversation in South Africa. Now, help me guys if I forget all the big names, but the Multi-Party Women's Caucus is they're women from all different parties of government. They're a caucus of women, so they get together. And the way legislation works in our country and in the majority of countries is that if a party proposes that a law should be changed, they hand over a bill. So what this women's caucus has been tasked with is seeing if they want to hand in a request to decriminalize prostitution in South Africa. What will this mean? It will become legal. So it can become legal or it can become partially legal. There's lots of complexities in it, but what we had the opportunity of doing with other organizations and other members of civil society is being involved in the conversation. We were in Parliament and we addressed these MP ladies. There was about 200 people there. And it was really challenging preparing for that because if you don't know truth, and if you are believing a lie that is parading as truth, you're believing the lie and it's truth for you. So what becomes really hard is that if you feel passionately like this is the truth, so for example, calling sex work, you're affirming that sex is work. Now, for me, at the baseline and the core, sex isn't work. Sex was created as something to instill intimacy in a loving, committed relationship. Now, anytime you take anything out of that context, you kind of deteriorate it, and with time it does damage. So prostitution has existed since the beginning of time. It's in the Bible. But the act of prostitution, the moment we start calling it sex work, we're saying that this is work, and that's where the confusing bit comes in, because anyone who's working should have workers' rights. Anyone who's doing something, they should be dignified and able to do their work. Now, I ask myself the question, will sex work ever be dignified work? And for me, it was no. After a lot of introspection, because this is the thing, the arguments are real. We sat in that room with real people who are working in the industry and saying we get beaten, we get hurt, there's violence, we don't have health care. And you're sitting there and you're thinking, okay, maybe it is a better option. Let's take it away. But if you look at the core, it's stigmatized in our society because inherently we know it's not right, it's not dignifying someone. So that's not going to go away just by changing the law. They will still be looked on, frowned upon by society. The violence is not going to go away because if the person who's buying the act is violent and wants violent interactions with the person who's selling it, that's still going to be there. And it's going to happen more. Why? Because now the stamp of this can happen has been put on it. And there's lots of more things that you can speak into this. But basically, when you start looking at it at surface level, the arguments make sense and they're good. And they really confront you. But when you start digging deeper and when you line it up with God's word, it can't, it doesn't match, it doesn't fit. What's our response? We need to love those people in that situation. Last night I was thinking about exit. I was standing at the back, there's a sign there that says exit. And I suddenly thought, why do people exit? Any situation in life, why do you look for an exit? Because there's a better option outside. Now, for many of these people, that's the best option they have. Why is it so important to do skills training, job opportunities, empower people in their own communities? Because you're giving them a better option. They can choose something different. But calling it, just simply changing the name to erase what we're dealing with and to have to make it easier to deal with the subject, it's kind of like sticking your head in the sand because it's going to keep happening and it's going to fester. Human trafficking happens in the hidden, dark places. And if we hide it more, it's just going to fester. I don't know if that answers your question. Our stance is stop. We are fully in favor of total criminalization with the option. We want things to be implemented in government so that there are effective exit plans. We don't have all the answers, but we're willing to work with government and with other NGOs and civil society on what can we do, but we cannot stand for something that breaks away at the core of a person.
Okay, I'm hoping that it is an offensive question, as the lady last night said, we're stepping on people's toes, but are there any organizations or parts of your organization that are focusing on the perpetrators, on the traffickers, trying to help them, and not just like jail ministries. So it's people actually going out on the street for that.
We partner with a ministry called MECAT, which stands for Media Campaign Against Human Trafficking. They do a street outreach that they call the treasure outreach. So they refer to the women in prostitution as treasures. And while they go out and minister to the treasures, they also are ministering to the pimps and the traffickers and the people in the syndicate as well. Yeah, so Anne and Alex Abuk are the ones that run MECAT, and they are from Nigeria. They have safe houses in Nigeria and do ministry that side. They do the traffic-proof presentation that I presented a little bit about in Nigeria, but they're also based here in the Muizenberg area. And they have had some amazing success. I think because a lot of the area that they mainly focus on is like Belleville and Paro. Did I say that right? And in Belleville, there's actually a block of flats where the Nigerian syndicates live. So they all live together in the same complex. And when we go there, I've been with them a couple times. We drive up, park at a McDonald's right next to the flats. You'll see the girls on the different corners, and you'll see like 20 guys just standing on the street together, just hanging out, kind of keeping an eye on things. And we had the privilege of talking to some of the women, but then Alex took me up to go meet the guys. And at first, the first time I was like a little freaked out, but when we got there, he was treating them, it was like, hey brother, how's it going? Good, how are you doing? And then they would switch to Nigerian dialect and then back to English, and they just had a normal conversation, and these guys just wanted to chat. And then Alex had told them that I play soccer, that I play football. And so he had told me that they started a ministry where they actually have a football team of pimps that plays soccer every Saturday morning at the flat, where one of the traffickers who had gotten saved and became a Christian was ministering to where the guys would play a game of football, and then afterwards he would share the gospel with them and love on them and teach scripture. And so far, like, there's like 6 or 7 pimps that have gotten saved because of that ministry. And so it's amazing, and I think we may hear more about that story later, maybe not, I don't know. I basically told you, his name's Tony, but Tony, so I'll just quickly, okay, so he's a Nigerian, and he was actually trafficked to South Africa by his own brother, and he was trafficked with the belief that he was going to come to play professional soccer. And so he was going to play soccer, he was going to make all this money, and he was going to send it back to his family. And his dream was to play soccer. That was his dream, that was his passion. And so he came, and while he was here, he had his documents. I don't think he had any legal documents, or if he did, they were taken. So he couldn't get legal work. And the syndicate that his brother was working for forced him to pimp girls and sell drugs, and that became his job. So that's what he did. It was a struggle. He had women under him that he was prostituting on the streets. And then one day, Ann and Alex had met him through one of the women that they were ministering to. And you'll hear that story as well. But there was a woman, one of the girls, one of the treasures, was on the street, and Ann approached her and started talking to her, sharing the gospel with her, and he saw them and was like, why are you talking to my girl? What are you guys doing? She's working, leave her alone. And he was angry and went up to them, and that was when they had met him for the first time and heard his dialect and realized he's Nigerian. So they started speaking in the same language, and he kind of calmed down and was like, oh, you're my people, okay, we have common ground. And they invited him to go get some food. They asked him, can we get you some food? Can we go to McDonald's and just talk? And he said yes, and they went, and while they were at McDonald's, they started speaking truth to him. They started loving on him. They bought him food and talked about the gospel and said, hey man, you don't have to do this. There's another way. There's hope for you. God has a future for you. What are your dreams? What are your passions? What do you want to do? And through that conversation, he ended up becoming a Christian and got saved and let all the girls under him go. So the girls that were working under him, he was done prostituting them. They were set free. And then he started ministering to the pimps, which is what's so cool is that his passion of football, God ended up using that still. He never got to play professional soccer, but God knew his heart, and he got to use soccer as a way to minister to his brothers, to these men that were still stuck in the industry. And now they're coming out and they're ministering, and it's just this beautiful picture of just redemption and discipleship. So yeah, pretty cool.
Thank you. Just a little thing. When we understand that what we're talking about is true freedom in Christ, we can't exclude the perpetrator. They're included in it because there wouldn't be freedom for all if they were excluded. So something that God's been stirring in our hearts for last couple of months, maybe the last year, but intensely, is like, it's not just about rescuing the victim. That's hugely important, but we also need these people because the influence that they have is like, it's major, where they can go and the people they're connected to, that's somewhere where we will never go. So, yeah, it's just encouraging. So if God lays it on your heart, there's a big need for that.
Just going back to the prostitution thing, I really think that something else that we need to focus on, and the church especially needs to focus on, is the demand side. There's so much focus on the supply, but we need to ask ourselves, why is there so much demand for prostitution? We need to look at the breakdown of families, the breakdown of marriages. We need to look at pornography, the effect that that is having and how it's fueling it. So that's just another aspect to bear in mind.
If we say that prostitution is illegal in South Africa, illegal for whom? For the prostitute or for the client? For both? Are people being prosecuted?
You know, our police force is in a bad way at the moment, and it comes from the top down. So prostitution is completely illegal, and for both John and the lady, but the girls are on the streets. And that's it. There's nothing more I can say, except that God needs to touch our leadership. We need the police to be redeemed. And Stop has been working with the police to train them up in human trafficking and give them skills and tools to be able to handle traffic victims. But in the process, we're just trusting God for an amazing work. We need a miracle to get prostitution not passed in South Africa. So as we are praying for this whole pornography thing with Cause for Justice, let us continue praying daily that God would, His grace would be upon this nation. Because if prostitution becomes legal in South Africa, we're going to be the biggest brothel in Africa because there's so much poverty. The girls are going to be streaming in over the borders from all over and saying, I'm coming to be a prostitute, I'm coming for this job. And South Africa is very vulnerable because of this, but yes, it's completely illegal at this stage, and we want it to stay that way, but we really want it to be implemented, which is not being done yet at this stage. Funnily enough, the vice squads in Cape Town are doing a good job, and have been done under the auspices of the DA councillor, I don't know what his name is, but Pierre something, forgotten his name, it's a blonde guy. He's been working for years, applying the bylaws of girls loitering on the street corners in Cape Town, and Jean-Pierre something, but this is, the vice squads have been doing, the municipal policing has been excellent in Cape Town, and they've really stopped a lot of prostituting there along the boulevards there. I don't know, would someone like to add to this?
Did that answer your question? Yes? Okay.
This is just something that came up to me. I read a book once, a lady, she was put in charge of running abortion clinics. And I think the topic would be the danger of humanizing sin. And the reason was, we say abortion clinics are there to prevent abortions. They give them counseling options, other options, rather than go through abortion. But she was actually employed to push up sales. So she started training them how to find an objection, because people come and they're not sure, how to overcome those objections so that she can get to the abortion. So I think there's a risk for prostitution as well. We would start with the humanitarian, but then it would turn into a business. So just to be aware of that. And then just a question, because you guys have all this training experience, and Alice really helped us as well with the testimonies, just practical testimonies. So you guys mentioned the manual that you guys want to release. You're busy with it. We asked about that. She said, you guys are busy. I don't know if you release something, or is that with stop training, like that you will give it, or is it something that will be available?
So one thing when we spoke to Nikki at the beginning of planning and brainstorming this whole idea, we had kind of felt that we want to lay a foundation. We want people to go away and be challenged. And when you are sure of what you want to do, then we take the next step. whether it be training, whether it be supporting, whether it be ideas, brainstorming, together with Nikki, and just through, if you're part of Shofar, through your leadership and the channel you have, we're here. We want to train, we want to help, we want to equip, we want to enable, we want to support everything we can do. So from that point, if you're not part of Shofar, you can connect with us directly and we can see how to move forward. But we do train people. We want people to be out there doing everything they can, and as much as we can, we enable it. Right now, we are busy working on our resources because it's an evolving thing. Things need to be updated. We're working on something that we feel like will be able to be used across all platforms, and we want to make it available to people. So that's in the pipeline. Yeah, did it answer? Definitely? Okay, cool. Any other questions? How much time do we have? We've got 10 minutes, so we can, oh, yes.
So obviously with crime and stuff, everybody's got a neighborhood watch these days. So if you guys are part of it, or everyone's got a WhatsApp group or whatever, like we can train neighborhood watches as well. I think that's a really good idea in spotting trafficking, especially at night, because they're up at night. So if you're part of a neighborhood watch, email Lyndall. She's the info at Stop Trafficking.
Yeah, so basically the way Stop functions is if you want us to be somewhere and present, we'll be there as much as is possible. So if an idea like that sparks and you don't feel you want to necessarily talk, but you want to do the connection, set it up, we're all for it.
I know you've spoken about Alex or some guy, but are there any other men involved in what you guys do? Or where are the men?
I'll just start, and then you guys, someone else needs to speak as well, because I can't say everything. But the struggle is real, not because men don't want to. I personally feel like many feel like, what can I do? Generally, people are like, what can I do to fight trafficking? Like, lots of people have the concept that it's only hands-on with victims. And then there's a struggle for men because they understand that the majority is women, the victims. And there's a bit of a struggle because of the lack of knowledge and understanding. I also feel like in the church, women are powerful, they're empowered, they stand up, but sometimes we override and we don't necessarily uplift the men around us. Instead, we're like, where are the men? So it's really, I'm not saying it because you said, sorry, that came out so bad. I really have a habit of doing this. I always stick my foot in my mouth. Anyway, but it's a real thing. We hear it often. I've said it. We've said it. Because there's a real struggle. But I think there's also like an underlying plan of the enemy, to put it that way. Like, if you can get the gatekeepers out of the way, women are easy targets, they're emotional, there's a bigger picture to it. We as women, we need to be uplifting, encouraging, and drawing men into this, helping them to understand their role. I think there's lots of reasons why, but for me, one of the big reasons is that maybe we don't communicate effectively how they can be involved. And maybe we just assume that this is a woman's area, but we need men. We really need men on this, because only a man can speak in a certain way to a young boy. There's certain things that men are better gifted to do, just like there's things that women are better gifted to do. So that's for me.
Yeah, I think just in addition to that, when we think about like the sex industry and the demand and the struggle, there's this stigma that men struggle more with pornography and with sexual addiction and with sexual brokenness, and there's some truth to that. There's a lot of truth to that. Women struggle as well, but it's seen as more of a man's struggle. And so I think one of the attacks of the enemy, and one of the ways he kind of breaks that down, is that he's using a lot of shame and guilt. If a guy ever struggled with porn, or if he ever struggled with sleeping around or whatever, he feels like, I'm automatically disqualified and I cannot get involved with this ministry. And that's not true. That's not true. I think obviously he needs to have freedom in that area of his life before he gets involved in this ministry. But I think there's this thought of like the enemy's just attacking with like shame of you're not good enough, you can't get involved, like you sin in this, or you're weak in this, or you're too broken. And he does that to all of us in different ways. But I think especially with the men, it's a big issue. And in the church, it's still very taboo. People don't like to talk about sex or even say the word sex in church. And they don't even like to say the word pornography in church. And it's like this, oh, he said it. Like, you know, it's like scary. And it's like, guys, we need to talk about it. This is, like, we all struggle with something. And this is, if sex is a gift from God and he designed it beautifully and perfectly, we shouldn't feel shame when we talk about it. And so I think that's a big issue when it comes to the spiritual side of the emotional idea of like, no, like I struggle with porn, I can't help this girl, or it's too weird. And I think the other thing in terms of us needing men is the testimony of, you know, when we're out on the streets, if, say for example, if Berta and I are talking to a treasure, and there's a guy behind us, and he's just praying. You know, the two of us are talking to her directly, but the guy's kind of standing off, and he's just praying, and he's just there lovingly protecting. That speaks volumes, not just to me and Berta of we feel protected, there's a covering, but also of to that girl seeing this man protect us and watch over us and love us. And so I think the guys sometimes feel like, oh, I can't talk to the girl because she's going to think I'm trying to like woo her or that I want to buy her. No, you don't have to. Like, that's what the women, we can do this, you know. There are also male prostitutes, male guys in that too, and the men need to step in because there's only so much we can do. But I think the guys need to understand that even just being present is such a testimony, and there's so much beauty in that, especially for the girls who've never seen what a godly man looks like, who've never had that example. Just to witness it, they don't even have to talk to him, just to see that can speak volumes. So it's so important. We need more men, for sure.
We do have two male members on the team. They're not here tonight. Okay. But in Somerset West, there's two that are working with us, but they're at home tonight. So but they do feel intimidated with all these women.
I think this comes back to what I was saying this morning. When we hear trafficking, we immediately equate it to sex trafficking. So we close it to men because we have preferences of what we like to work in, and we have to respect if a man doesn't want to work in that. So now we say they don't want to get involved. But if we do the research and we open up the other areas, because that is happening in South Africa, I will tell you the men will help. But the other thing is also the fight against trafficking in South Africa is still in its infant stages. So it's regarded as a pet project or a charity event, and mostly women are equated with charity work. So it's also a bit of a stigma for men, mostly, because they don't do charity work. They're the breadwinners. They bring the money home. The lady can do charity work to ease her conscience. So we need to just keep on doing this, persevering until that thing breaks and the men become part of this. And we have more forms of trafficking that we can focus on, not just the sex trafficking, and then they will automatically, I believe, become part of the whole fight of this. And also our team in Northwest, we have men, so they are there and they are excellent with the little ones in the school. It's very cool to see them, so yeah.
I just want to say something as well. I mean, when we've been talking about sex trafficking, we're talking a lot about ladies, but I'm sure you all realize there are boys and men that are involved in that as well. In fact, the first trafficking victim that I met was a 16-year-old boy who had been just picked up along the side of the road and kept as a victim, as a sex victim. So yeah, we need to just remember that as well, and we obviously need men to work with them as well.
I say one more thing. I have the full support of my husband behind me. His covering and his protection over me and his prayers. He's proudly excited about the work we do. And he doctors all the girls from head to toe when they're sick. And he organizes them to be cared for. So I can't do the work I do if I didn't have the blessing and protection and cooperation and absolute buy-in of my husband in this ministry.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. You are the only one putting your hand up.
Yeah, I was praying. I was like, Lord, please. My question was actually the same question, where are the men? I just wanted to honor all the ladies being involved here. I was looking at it, and last night actually God asked me, I felt myself asking, where are the men in this? And I know this is Awaken, the women's ministry that is partnering with Stop at the moment for this weekend. And and you answered most of my questions. How can men get involved? And that's really cool. So all of that, and I think lots of the fight for the men doesn't happen on the streets. It happens on your laptop at home, on the phone, and that's where the men are busy losing the battle. So that's where we must start winning the battle. Sorry, I'm not asking questions. No, I don't want to. Not now. So I just want to honor all the ladies and say the men will stand up as we pray and trust God for that. And yeah, but also, sorry, just practically in terms of, I know I've got small groups under me, like how can we, because in Stellenbosch the students have small groups on Wednesdays in the evenings. Is there a platform that can be created for that, to equip like a small group to say your outreach once a month can be standing behind the ladies and praying, for example, while they are engaging with prostitutes, whatever it is. Are there platforms like that? Like, I love Tony's testimony. It was Tony, right? The soccer guy. Like, there are obviously places to get involved like that. But for the vehicle that I know Stellenbosch has, students have small groups on Wednesdays, and usually your outreach is to go pray at the hospital. Is there something like that?
If there isn't, we'll create it, just saying. So I don't know what they're going to say, but if there isn't, or we'll connect you to someone who's already doing it.
One of the things, I'm going to speak about Barry. Corin and I were talking about him earlier. He's like this really, really old guy. Like, Noah brought him with him on the ark. But he's got the heart of Jesus. So what he did was, and it's probably not for everyone, but to me it was like, this is cool, right? So I'm going to tell you this story. He went into the brothel and he would pay the fee for a girl. And then he would take her out of the brothel to lunch or whatever. And he would ask her, like, what's your dreams? What do you want to do? You know, all those really inspiring questions. And she would answer him, and then he would proceed to take her out. And then he had this big trust fund, so he would pay for her to do like college courses, whatever they want. And that's just to take them out of that situation where they were in. Now, obviously, this is not for everyone, but I feel this should be for the very rich guys. So I can guarantee you that God will stir your heart if you have a lot of money to pay for a girl's dream to actually get out of a brothel and make a really, really big difference in her life. Do you get this? Woohoo!
Does anyone else want to answer the question, or are you good with we'll make a plan, however? Is that good? Okay. The question was, are there opportunities to kind of support and come alongside? Whatever we aren't doing or don't have the capacity to do now, our policy, to be fancy, is always to connect you with whoever we're working with that is doing the things. So we don't want to be selfish. It's not all about stop. We love what we do. We're passionate about our organization. We wear it proudly. But this is what we're all about. So it's all about together for freedom. If together is with churches, if it's with communities, if it's with individuals, if it's with other organizations, government, the list is endless. We want freedom. However that happens, we're not exclusive. So get in touch, and as long as we can connect you or start something, it's all good. Can we have one last question? Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I just want to ask Semi, how often do you go to the same school? Because with the kids, as soon as you leave, some of them, they've already forgotten what you've taught them. How often do you come to how often do you visit one school? Like, do you go like every month or keep on reminding them? And how do you do it, Semi?
That is a really, really good question, and that's something that we've actually been discussing at STOP, is how can we follow up? The cool thing, right now, we usually go to a school once, and we may go back the following year, so there's a big gap. But what is cool and what has happened is, for example, I was at a primary school somewhere, it was in the Somerset West area, and one of the kids that I spoke to at the school he also attended our church, my church. And so I taught at the school, and I taught them the helpline number and all of these things that we do in the presentation. And it was maybe two-ish weeks afterwards, I was at the church, and he came up to me at the church and tugged on me, and he's like, teacher, 0800-222-777. And they just smiled at me. And I was like, oh my gosh, he remembered. And this kid was like 5, like he was so little. And so for me, that was like, oh my gosh, he remembered. Like he actually was, this 5-year-old child was paying attention when I was giving the helpline number. And so, and the same thing happened in Miami when I was speaking with my mom is a teacher as well. And I went to her school and was doing preschoolers up to grade 4, grade 5. And my mom had told me that the parents were coming back to her saying that the kids were coming home doing the, I am special, God loves me. And they were doing the hand motions at home. And the parents were like, what did you teach my child? She's singing God songs and talking about her body and saying no, and she knows she's special. And these parents were amazed because the child was repeating it over and over, and it stuck with them. And so we definitely want to get better at following up with schools, especially when it comes to having, we call them champions, having like a champion in each school, like a social worker or a life orientation teacher that we can connect with like over and over again and even train up. But we're still in the process of figuring out how to do that in the most efficient way. But we have had some really good feedback of kids remembering and retaining the information. So that's been, for me, that's been really encouraging.
First prize would be if our program gets implemented in the life orientation classroom, because there's a little bit in grade 10, you know, so paragraphy, which is really totally insignificant and not worthwhile. So what we're working on is the Department of Education to implement, we've got a beautiful book called, it's a teacher's training manual, and we're busy working on it. It's still got some fine tuning to be done, but we give that to the life orientation teacher when we do a school, and we say to them, please continue doing this every month. And we won't need to go to any schools anymore if this program gets implemented as part of the curriculum in every South African school. But what I would like to say, and that is to you as church, you can go and approach your children's Sunday school teacher or your children's nursery school teacher and say, you've got a lovely program you'd like to come and present. And you can go to the high school and try and get a teacher or the headmaster to open a door for the team to go. And then join the teams as they go. And it's like a diensopleiding, you weet. And if you have a passion for reaching children and love doing programs with kids, come on board and let this team train you. And then go into the schools. In your ministry, it's easy to go to schools and do awareness training. It's a soft landing in this industry, the one we're working in. So it's just a thought that came to mind, that for everyone sitting here who have children in some or other school, go and approach the headmaster on our behalf and ask them if we can go and do a program at your school. Join the team and learn how to do the program yourselves.
I just want to add on to what Karen said. As I read the Bible, it's... Are you laughing? I read my Bible. So oftentimes when I read the Bible, I see that it's the people that have often led leadership to victories. So that teaches us that if we put pressure on leadership, i.e. parents, the headmaster, they will have to submit at some point and allow organizations into the schools to come do training, and it'll be for Jesus at the end of the day. So as the parents, who's got kids? Well, like 2 people, well done. Okay, so mobilize the parent body to put pressure on, because a lot of schools don't allow us in because the message is Jesus or whatever, for whatever reason. So if you put pressure on them, they will let us in at the end of the day. But you have to put pressure on them. Okay, cool.
So mostly I think it's just once because the classes, they are disrupted. If it's the bigger kids, it really disrupts the class if you come in and do a 30-minute presentation, 45 minutes. But that's why prayer is so essential, because we know we only have this one chance to see this one class, and we pray and pray and pray about this, and we really believe and trust that whatever it is that God wants to instill, whatever it is that the Holy Spirit wants to use, He will do that, even with a short amount of time we have, even with the attention span and the memory problems children have, that He will use this. And I tell you, you have to rely on God and leave it in His hands, because I've seen these little ones that I had the opportunity to present to, like tiny, tiny, tiny little people. And they don't speak my language, but the police said, please come and do this presentation. And they stand there and look at me, and I'm like, please, God, just you take over and you do this. And they're like so vulnerable, and I almost want to cry, but I didn't because the police was there. So, just protect them and just take something of this and just instill it in their hearts and just be with them, because you get one opportunity, and that's okay. So just go in with prayer, do what you can. God